Welcome. My guest today is Angela de Longchamps. She is the CEO and founder of a very interesting organization called Inspired Leadership. Angela has over 20 years experience in the corporate world. She's designed, she's facilitated, she's managed, she's consulted on leadership development programs worldwide. So with this vast experience, she definitely knows the constraints, the limitations, the hurdles that need to be overcome to develop a great leader. So welcome, Angela. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me, Stephen.
My pleasure. Well, our first question for everybody is always, what does the term great leadership mean to you?
It's a great question because I think it is quite personal based on your experience. And as a South African, a great leader like Nelson Mandela has got two sides. It's like the coin has always got two sides. So we often idolize someone like that who has managed to navigate what was a politically very difficult time in the country through tremendous humility and adopting an incredibly reconciliatory approach to warring factions and letting ego not be the center of what drove him. But that was a mature, very evolved Mandela. Earlier in the career of, as he grew as a leader, he was far more flawed, really, a normal flawed human being. But when I think of leadership in general, I like to think of great leaders as people who are able to leave their ego outside and manage that part and lead with a humility and a humanness about the people, about what they're doing, about their good and their bad parts.
Excellent. I totally agree. And it's something that the whole world needs that right now, both in the corporate world as well as our political leadership world, our nonprofit organization world. In fact, one of the best books I've read on leadership in the last few years was called The Leadership Killer. And it's the same approach. They kind of say the ego is the leadership killer. And then if you have more humility, you'll be a greater leader. It's great points. Thank you. Can anyone be a great leader? Is there a roadmap somebody can follow?
The research that I've done kind of gives the impression that about 25% of leadership is inherent. So if you happen to be born with that 25% or develop it in your youth, that's going to give you a head start. But it's not a given because 75% can be learned. So that means some skill sets can be developed over time, and anybody can lead at least to a 75% effectiveness. And I think it also depends on which environment you find yourself in as to what will be more effective with which group at what time period in which space.
Great. And do you think those leadership skills actually start in our youth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the environment that you grow up in, your education, your exposure at school, I'm not saying exposure to all the wonderful extramurals, not at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It's going through adversity or having to struggle through something or working in teams or playing football with out in the dirt. Those are opportunities for leaders to grow. I think biologically, though, we do have some predispositions for leadership, especially in the early years in classrooms and so on, and in your youth. The research has showed that if you're born in the first quarter of your academic year, you're generally bigger and more mature than the people who are born in the last quarter of the year. And so because you're generally bigger and more mature, people look up to you and as a result ascribe leadership to you and expect more from you than those people who are maybe smaller or less mature. And that's a breeding ground for leadership potential. When leadership gets expected from you, most often kids will step into that space. And the more time you step in, the more comfortable it becomes. So I think it absolutely can start early in your life.
That's fascinating because I remember some of the research I did on unconscious bias. And I remember anecdotally how, young girls who show those leadership skills in school sometimes, start organizing people to do things or sort of say, slow down, Sally, don't be bossy. But where a boy does the exact same thing, he's showing leadership skills. So the young Tommy is showing leadership skills. So part of it is genetic, as you say. Part of it's just the environment that we grow up with.
Absolutely. And then you can see it kind of playing out in the workplace. the struggles that organizations face with developing diversity in the leadership pipeline and in boardrooms and executive groups. Just that same bias comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got a lot of experience. You've worked in multinational companies. You're now training and educating young leaders in various leadership skills. How can supervisors, first-time managers, what I call mid-level leaders, how can they exhibit great leadership skills?
Well, that's a very small question, Steve. So people have asked me before, where is the starting point for leadership? Like, if you could just pick one skill, what would it be? And I'm hard pressed not to be very devoted to listening. I think if you listen more, if you ask more questions and you listen more to other people, that's the beginning of leadership. Because it's not about me, which is ego. It's about what are others able to contribute. And if I can hear more, then I can get more opinions, and I can leverage the strengths of others. I can invite diversity into the conversation. And it's through listening well and inviting that through questions. Oddly enough, I would say that is the starting point for great leadership.
You know, we're on the same page on that. One of my favorite phrases I like to tell people is we all have 2 ears and 1 mouth. If we would listen twice as much as we talk, we would learn a whole lot more. We'd be much better leaders.
Exactly. And plus it takes the pressure off you having to feel like you should know everything.
Absolutely.
If you went with the asking approach, you'd realize actually the people around this room know a lot more than I do. And my job is to make it safe for them to give of their best. As a first-line manager, as a supervisor, if I can make it safe for them to give of their best, I'm leading.
Outstanding. No wonder your programs are so successful. Last question, and I ask this because of the world we live in today and a lot of remote leadership going on. And I suspect as we get out of the pandemic, we're still going to have a lot more remote leadership requirement. People are not going to be as co-located in the past. So what are the challenges do you see that great leaders face in leading remote team workers?
I did some research on this well before the pandemic, and it almost became a conversation around natural style. So if you're naturally an extroverted leader, you tend to find this virtual world very challenging because you have to be very intentional with relationships in the virtual world. Whereas extroverted leaders tend to manage by walking around and bumping into people and having conversations at the coffee stand or the water cooler or meeting together and kind of influencing by their presence. Whereas the more introverted leader didn't find that as comfortable because there's just often a lot of people and are draining, but they make for much better remote managers because they like the one-on-one, because they like to be intentional about setting up times to check in. So they're no better or worse at relationships. They're just more suited to this remote work. So I think it's an interesting insight for people to think about. Where am I on that scale? Have I struggled because I don't bump into people? Or is it actually quite comfortable having these one-on-ones? I can look you in the eye. Using video is important. It's super important. Micro expressions, tone element. That's so important with virtual work and particularly virtual leadership. You've got to read between the lines and not just read what people say.
Great. Did the research indicate that maybe introverts also plan their conversations more than extroverts who seem to kind of wing it? They just go into conversations and happily have that conversation?
Completely. Yeah. That's the same kind of thing. Is the planning, the scheduling, the foresight, the kind of realizing, I haven't spoken to Steve all week. Absolutely. Speak to Steve and I'll diarize that for Friday morning. And things like being intentional with feedback. I train a lot of feedback, and it's a huge part of what makes leadership work is your ability to give and receive feedback. I use this, and I advocate for others to do the same, is to put a reminder in your calendar to give somebody feedback every week.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't come naturally to everybody. So if it doesn't come naturally, you've got to use your tools and your systems to help, because that's what they're there for.
Excellent. Well, you've been watching Discussions on Great Leadership. I'm Stephen Howard. I'm glad to host this program. I've been talking with Angela today. She runs Inspired Leadership. Go to www.inspiredleadership.world, not .org, not .net, .world to find out more about her leadership programs. And if you like these discussions on leadership, be sure to hit the subscribe button below and also give us a thumbs up. Give us a like there on this YouTube channel. That's it for today, and we'll look forward to another Discussions on Great Leadership in the future. Thanks. Thank you.